I planned to be a business writer, and that's why I pursued a minor here in the business school. And I wish I had paid a little more attention in accounting and finance and all those things that I do now in real life, you know. But I have loved starting a magazine. It was 13 years ago this month that our first issue of Utah Valley Magazine came out. And it was honestly one of the most exciting days of my entire life to see that come to fruition and have a magazine come out. Now when I look at that first issue, I'm a little ashamed. Our layout isn't as good and our photography isn't as good as it is now. But it was so exciting, and some of you have experienced that with starting your own businesses, or you will experience that in coming days. So it's been, I've gotten my MBA by starting a business, I guess you could say. And I've learned a lot of lessons, and I want to share a lot of those with you today. I was fortunate coming into college that I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a journalist. Other than a few short weeks where I listened to my dad, who thought I should be a physics major, and I switched to that for 3 weeks, and then I realized I've always known what I wanted to do, and I switched back. And I always wanted to be a journalist from when I was a young child. A lot of what we think and feel as children ends up being clues to who we really are intended to be. I just took the color code I took it before, but I took it again last week for a class that I've been taking. Have any of you taken the color code personality test? Okay. So I just took that, and I noticed in the instructions it said, reflect back to your childhood when you're answering these. Think of yourself in your childhood behavior and thoughts. And I thought that was an interesting thing, that the most accurate way to assess your personality was to think back to being a child. So when I was little, I was very interested in the idea of news and journalism. I have an older sister, and she wanted to be a teacher. She came home from kindergarten, and she sat me down. I was a year and a half younger, and she taught me everything she knew. And so I went to kindergarten with her, essentially. She went in the morning, she made me go in the afternoon with her. She became a teacher. She's been a teacher for 20 years. She made us play school. And after a little while, I asked her if I could make a school newsletter for her little school. And that was another clue that I was going to become a journalist. I wanted to create news and articles and put words together and share information with people. And that was who I wanted to be. And it has been a life's journey that I have loved. So here's a little bit about my journey. When I was in elementary school, I had a teacher who changed my life, really, and many people's lives. She let us not come to school for a day. That's the part we were excited about. But she wanted us to job shadow somebody. This was 5th grade. She said we had to get it approved through her and all of that, but we were to think of a career we were interested in and put together a job shadowing opportunity. Well, I grew up in Idaho Falls, Idaho. Any Idaho Falls Ians out there? A little bit of joy back there. Gem State forever. And so I set up a job shadowing to go to the Post Register in Idaho Falls and follow a news reporter around for the day. Well, this was before cell phones, obviously, and internet and all of that. She got a call at her desk that a school bus had driven off the side of the road. It had slid off. It was full of children, and roads are icy in Idaho, so this wasn't all that uncommon. But the fact that there were children on it and perhaps in danger, it became news. So we hopped in her car and we drove out to the bus, and I watched her interview the students, and there were some parents coming to get their kids, and she interviewed the bus driver and took a picture. And then we went back to the newsroom and we developed the film in the darkroom, things you'll never know about. And then I watched her type up the story, and she acted like I was helping her. She'd asked me to remind her about different things. The next morning, that picture and that story was on the front page. And I was just enthralled by that we saw and talked to these people, and then we shared it with the whole community within hours. I thought that was pretty darn exciting. And so that really lit a fire in me, in addition to the playing school and doing the school newsletter and all of those things. Then when I was in high school, my first job, I worked at the local TV station. I can't believe they allowed me to do this, but I was the camera operator as a 15, 16-year-old, operating the camera, zooming in, panning out, telling them when we were going to start. And another one of my duties was to call. I had a list of about 25 people, mostly quite elderly people, who had thermometers that the TV station had given them, and they were to watch that thermometer all day, and then I would call them and ask what the high and low had been and what it was right now. And that was the highlight of their day. Mabel from Malad. It was hard to get her off the phone because she was so excited to tell me about the high and low for the day. And again, I loved it. And at the time, I thought maybe I would go into broadcast journalism because I did love that job at the TV station. But I asked the workers there, and especially the women, about it. And this is one of my perhaps keys to success is that I've been curious and willing to ask questions of people. And so I would ask the women for advice. What do you think about this career? Are you happy with your choice? How does it affect your family? Because we were working evenings, and in high school that worked for me. I actually liked it. You know, we'd go in for the 6 o'clock news, go home for dinner, and come back for the 10 o'clock news, and that worked for me. But I was wondering how it worked for them. And they said, you know, if you want to have a family, this might not be the best route for you. And I did want to have a family, and so I listened to them. I know that you can do that, but just from the advice I got and the feelings I had for myself, I decided not to go into broadcast. I went on to college. I count as one of my greatest blessings that I had to earn every penny through college. I had my dad's a school teacher, there were 7 children. It was just an understood fact that there was not going to be any help with college. There was encouragement to go, but no financial resources. And I count that as a great blessing because I always had to work, and I was smart enough to piece together jobs that had something to do with my interests and something to do with my major and my career. And so I always worked at the school newspaper. I was the editor of the Daily Universe. It's changed a lot since I was here. And I had other writing jobs and editing jobs. And when I graduated, I had a resume. And those students that I was jealous of along the way who never had to work, they graduated with a transcript and not a resume because they weren't forced to have one. And so I count that as just such a great blessing that I had to do that. Also throughout college, I got internships. I did 3 internships, another major, major key to especially success in journalism, but to anything really. It's awesome to have a few months where you get to try out a job with no expectations on either part to continue on. I love having interns at our company now, and I loved my internships because I learned a lot. My first internship was technical writing. I did not want to do that, but that was valuable. Didn't have to waste any more time down that path. And then I interned at the New Era magazine for the LDS Church, and that was my first magazine experience. And then I interned at the Deseret News. Both of those last 2 internships turned into some long-time employment opportunities. So that helped me as well, and along the way I earned my bachelor's and master's here at BYU. My journey to journalism continued when I became a mom, because for the first time when I became a mom, my thinking switched. As I was growing up, I was part of a religious, conservative family in Idaho Falls where my mother was a stay-at-home mom, and really every woman that I knew was a stay-at-home mom, everyone I was related to. That was the model that I had seen, and I was planning on that. And then also, I did well in school, and I was happy and loving my major and my internships, and I did well there. And somehow I didn't really fathom the day when those 2 worlds were going to collide, and I was going to have to decide what to do. And that day happened when my oldest will be 16 next month. So 16 years ago, I was working at the Deseret News until about 12 hours before he was born. Worked right up until the end. And he was born. It was an exciting day. I became a mom. And for the first time, I was faced with a very difficult decision. Who am I? Am I this person? Am I a stay-at-home mom? Or am I a career person? Or could I be both? I wanted to be both. And for me, the avenue that fit that gave me the flexibility and gave me the opportunity to be the kind of mom I wanted to be was entrepreneurship. I had never considered this before. It's crazy to me to look back at that and think I went through college not knowing about any of these awesome competitions you're having and all of these exciting events. I had no interest in that at the time. I had other plans. But when I became a mom, I became an entrepreneur. And so I love that. It's definitely part of my journey. This is my youngest. My kids all think she's the favorite, and she probably is right now. She's very fun. But it has given me the chance to be the kind of mom I want to be. I have 5 kids. There's 4 that are in school, and then there's a pretty big gap. And then this is Lola Fern. She just turned 1.5 last week. And my kids are part of the reason that I do what I do and love what I do, so that I can be with them. All right, so our company, let me tell you a little bit about where we started. So after I became a mom and my thinking started to change, my needs started to change. I wanted to be home, but I wanted to put my education to use and my passion for my field. And so my husband, I married a fellow journalist. We would talk at night and brainstorm, what could we do? What could we do? And we came upon this idea. We should do a newsletter for high school journalism advisors. Tiny, tiny niche. We had gone through high school journalism programs. In fact, my father-in-law had been my teacher in high school, my future father-in-law. And what we knew after going to all these journalism conferences is that a lot of times journalism advisors don't really know how to do newspaper. They're just an English teacher that get thrown, hey, how about you start a newspaper? And so we had this idea to start this service for them called Scholastic News Service, or SNS, and we would give them story ideas. This was before they had internet in their classrooms and email. So we would give them story ideas. We would give them the latest research from the Department of Education and on teen driving and all these things, and we would basically help them build their newspaper. This was our thought, and we were sure it was going to succeed. We were brand new entrepreneurs. Maybe it's good we didn't go to these classes and know some stats on failure. We just were so sure it was going to work. We had one baby at the time, like I mentioned, and we were building a house. It was a starter home, but it was going to be a new home. And so we were actually living in my parents' basement. I don't even want to admit that, but we were living in my parents' basement. So we were down there for those few short months building our house, and we had this thought, this is going to work. We're going to send a sample of this newsletter to every high school in the country. There's about 10,000, along with the sales letter, and of course it will work. Well, we didn't have the money, so it was about $5,500 on a credit card to print and mail this. We did everything we could ourselves. We hand-stuffed every envelope. We labeled them ourselves. We organized it by zip code ourselves. We hauled it to the post office in the back of my mom's Suburban with no fear that this is the riskiest thing we ever did. And we sent it off on the mail, out in the mail. 7 days later, we were having lunch, and I said to my husband, I'm so discouraged. I thought we would have been flooded with orders by now. And right then the phone rang. We had put in a 1-800 line, and it was Patty Kennedy from Seattle, Washington, my first ever customer. I still remember, I've never met her, but Patty Kennedy called to order her $59.95 subscription to the newsletter, and we were on our way. And my most exciting moment from then on was going to the mailbox every day and seeing how many new orders we had and processing them. And it really, my motherhood gave me the desire and the need to be an entrepreneur, but this first project gave me the love of it. That it could be just go from an idea to a business. Now this was a small business. We did it for about 10 years. We actually don't do it anymore. But it taught us so many things. We learned about sales tax and bulk mail permits and 1-800 lines and all those little things that we had to get in place to do this little business. And so this was our part of our livelihood for a time. Then 2 years into that, we thought, we need a bigger project. We need something with more potential. And this is when we decided to start Utah Valley Magazine. This is our very first issue. This is the one that I was telling you is a little bit hard to look at now, just because we've gotten better. But for our very first issue, I called all the people you would assume I would call. I tried to get Robert Redford and Steve Young and Donny Osmond, and they're all going, who are you? What? A brand new magazine? Well, they didn't say that, their people did, right? Because it's hard to get a hold of those type of people. I even I got down my list, and I thought, maybe I'll call Ken Garf. Maybe that'd be fun, all these car dealerships around. So I call up the dealership and ask for Ken Garf, and they said, Ken Garf is no longer alive. And I thought, didn't do my research. So, not one of my prouder moments. I hope they didn't have caller ID. But we ended up doing our first cover on Thanksgiving Point Gardens, which opened the same time our first issue came out. So the timing was wonderful, and I wish I would have thought of that from the start, because I love Karen and Alan Ashton and all the good that they have done for the community in starting Word Perfect and then Thanksgiving Point. So this was our very first issue 13 years ago this month. And our magazine the first year or so was everything to everybody. That's what we were trying to be. We had a bride section. We had a business section. We had things for teenagers and kids and adults and grandparents, and trying to just cover all of our bases. And what we soon found was that what we were taught in Communications 101 is true, that you have to think about your audience, and we needed to have a tighter audience. And so we became more true to our audience, which was more female, and we started a couple of other publications, including Utah Valley Bride. This is one of our recent issues. If any of you follow the blog Pink Peonies, this is Rachel Parcell right here. She was on our bride cover. And then we also started our business magazine, call it Business Q. It's quarterly, and some of you may have gotten a sample as you came in the door. And then we also began doing some custom publishing. One thing led to the next. We got our very first office after about 2 years. We'd worked out of our house until we just could not do that anymore. And we rented an office right next to the Utah Valley Home Builders Association. Not meaning to do that, but within months they hired us to do their publishing for the Parade of Homes. If any of you have been to a Parade of Homes, you put on the booties, go see the beautiful homes. And so we do publishing for the Parade of Homes around the state. And so things just led one to another. And then from there, we started having people ask us, businesses ask us to do publications for them. We have a publication called Prosper where we highlight home-based business solutions, or in other words, mostly direct sales or multi-level marketing companies. There are a lot of them in this county. Some of you may have already worked for them or maybe will work for them someday. It's an interesting industry. We do this magazine for them. It's on newsstands nationwide. We also have one called Celebrating Women. And then we get hired to do like Orem Summerfest, different one-time publications for events and people in the Valley. It's a lot of fun. I think one thing that makes us unique is that we're a husband-wife combination. I'll read this cartoon to you. The woman's behind the desk and the man's across from the desk. And he says, "I think firing me would be a big mistake, mostly because we're married and we need the money." It is a unique thing to be married to your business partner and to spend that much time together, make that many decisions together. How many of you are married in this room? Okay, so maybe half-ish or so. You know, when I got married, just a little quick aside, my biggest fear is that we would run out of things to say. I would see older couples at Applebee's or Chili's on Friday night, and they'd be looking out the window, and it just seemed like they didn't have anything to say. Have you ever seen anyone like that? And when I was engaged, I was thinking that is my biggest fear, is that at some point, have you told each other all your stories and there's just nothing in the tank? Well, owning a business together has given us a lot to talk about. And so that one fear is no longer there. But it does make it interesting. The biggest challenge isn't getting along, it's that we want to talk about it and could talk about it all the time. So it's hard to just turn it off. But it is, I think, one of our secrets to success is that we have each other. I wanted to share 9 things I've learned from people I've interviewed. My favorite thing about what I do is that I meet people like Scott. And I meet people like probably a lot of the speakers that you've had in here. Nick Greer, who was teaching the class just prior to this, has been on our cover. I get to interview interesting people and learn from them. I get to ask them really whatever I want, and sometimes they'll say this is off the record, and I'm always obedient to that request. But I learned so much from them, and I want to share 9 things today that I think are business principles that I've heard over and over again and tried to implement them in my life. And the first one is be positive. Now, these might even sound cliche to you, but they are so very, very true. 2 examples of this. I'll start with the right one, actually. We do an article every year called High School Students Who Will Change the World. And we highlight one high school student from every high school in the Valley. So 12 to 18 has been our range through the years as the number of schools has changed. And it's a very vague title, right? Who's going to change the world? Well, we do it that way on purpose because we don't necessarily want all valedictorians and all top athletes. We want a variety because we believe you can change the world in a lot of different ways, and that you don't have to be a cookie-cutter person to do that. So the principals help us and the counselors help us identify someone who's going to change the world. And so they come in and they're so different. We'll have the band student come in and be lugging the tuba, and they have one kind of vibe and personality. And then you have the high school athlete come in, he's feeling good, and he's high-fiving the office manager as he comes in. And then you have the Operation Smile president who comes in, is very focused and generous, and they all have different vibes, and I love it. It makes the story so interesting. But they all answer this one question the same way. When I ask them, what do you love about your high school? They all light up, and they all say essentially this same thing. I love my high school. It is the best high school in the Valley. We don't have cliques. The teachers are the best. We have so much school spirit. They all think they go to the best high school, and I love that. Because them thinking that positive thinking that they have is the reason that they're going to change the world. It takes positivity to get anywhere in life. There's a lot to be negative about. There's a lot of traffic jams and rainy days and disappointing people and status updates that are unfavorable or whatever it is. But if you're positive, you can overcome them, and those don't have to affect you. Going to the left, this is Hillary Week. She was on the cover of Utah Valley Magazine last summer. And it's a little bit of a long story, but basically she's a singer-songwriter, and she heard at a Relief Society meeting, actually, that we have 300 negative thoughts a day. And she couldn't believe that. And she thought, well, I don't think I do. And so she got herself one of those clickers, where you count things. Maybe the guy counting sacrament meeting attendance, click, click, click. That kind of a clicker. And she thought, I'm going to count my negative thoughts. And so she began to do that. And she was having a lot of them. The dog wasn't house trained, and her husband said something annoying, and her kids weren't ready on time. And she did that day after day. At the end of 1 week, she said she could hardly get out of bed because she was so depressed, and nothing about her life had changed. She had the same amount of money and the same house and all of this, but she had focused on the negative things. So she said the next week she was going to count positive thoughts. So again, she had the clicker, and she started counting, oh, it's a beautiful tree, and oh, the light turned green right on time, and all of these positive things. And by the end of that week, she was flying around so happy because she had focused on different things. And so she now has a business where she sells clickers and stickers to go with it about positive thinking, clickers and stickers. and I love that about her. And it's very true. Positive thinking is step number one, really, to succeeding. So many people will tell you that you can't succeed, so you've got to be the one to know that you can succeed. Number two is to be persistent. I have heard this consistently from every business person that I've interviewed. Consistency, persistent, just believing that you can do it and not giving up. And I had my chance to practice that principle when I wanted to interview Ann Romney. This is actually a 2008 issue, so it's getting a little bit older, but I can still remember everything about it very clearly because it was a lesson to myself. I wanted to interview Ann. I had interviewed Mitt back when the Olympics were here, and I wanted Ann on our July issue cover because that's our women's issue. And so I began pursuing it months in advance and putting in requests with PR people, and this is when they were running the first time. And I knew they were busy, I knew it would take time, but just wheels weren't turning and things weren't happening, and I would see them on all these national outlets, of course, doing the things that they needed to do. And I was just hoping that I could be part of that too, and that I could interview her. They were BYU students, a lot of ties to Utah Valley, and that was just a dream I had of mine. In fact, I put a note on my desk, Ann Romney or bust, and I still have it up there because it's just on a sticky note. It's not even, I would have written it with better handwriting if I knew it'd be up there for 5 years. But I just wanted to do it. And I had talked to her assistants, and things just weren't happening. And so I heard that she was going to be in town for a fundraising event. You could pay to go, and I was a fan of the Romneys, and so I was okay to do that. And so I paid my fee and went to the lunch and stood in line afterwards to talk to Ann Romney. And I visited with her and said I had interviewed Mitt before and explained our magazine, had it in my hand, and asked if she would be willing to be on the cover. And she said, sure, that would be great. Just talk with my assistant right here. We'll get it all set up. Well, the assistant and I look at each other like, we've been talking for quite a while. But I thought, now that the assistant's heard it from Ann, maybe things will happen. So the assistant was trying to make things happen for me after that, but things were really busy. And the race was heating up and all of that. Well, I did get a call that the Romneys were going to be in Utah for 2 weeks, and that she didn't know when, this assistant didn't know when, but if I would be on call, that they would let me know when the Romneys had a few hours, and I could come over and we could do it. We could do the interview and take some photos as well. So I spent 2 weeks, this was in the summer, I spent 2 weeks carrying around my briefcase, being ready, making sure I had jewelry. I went to a family reunion this way because I knew as soon as I wasn't ready, that's when they would call. The end of 2 weeks goes by, and I see on KSL that night, the Romneys have left. They flew out of the airport this afternoon. I just thought, my sticky note says persistent, and I'm going to get this, Ann Romney or bust. So I was sad, and I was a little bit frustrated too, because it had been several months. So I called the assistant back and said, oh, we didn't make that happen. Is there anything we can do? Anyway, by the end of that day, she said, well, if you're willing to fly to Southern California, she's going to be spending a few days down with her horses down there. If you're willing to do that, we'll give you most of a day that you could spend with her. Well, as you can imagine, being the editor of Utah Valley Magazine does not involve a lot of travel. Point of the mountain to Santaquin. So it was exciting and fun to fly down there and spend a day with her and take a photographer with me as well, and to learn a lot from her. By this time, they had dropped out of that race. And so she was pretty open with me, told me some things off the record, but other things on the record about their experience. And I was really proud of myself. On the flight home that night, I thought, it's true. I was just persistent, like everyone had taught me, and eventually it came to be, and I was not disappointed by my time with Ann Romney. The next thing is to be passionate. This is Dave Tuomisto. I've interviewed him several times. He's a serial entrepreneur in restaurants. He started 4 restaurants here in Utah Valley: Rose's, Bahio, he started the Bahio chain, and then Marley's, which has a couple locations, and now he has Milagros in Orem on 800 North. So anyway, a few years ago, I was interviewing him about his restaurant, and I started with a pretty basic open question. And I said, Dave, what made you want to start a restaurant? And he looked at me like, duh, dumb question, and he said, I think everybody wants to start a restaurant. And I just wanted to laugh, and I said to him, I'm pretty sure everybody wants to start a magazine. And we just had a chuckle over that because we were both so passionate about what we do that we couldn't imagine that everyone else wasn't wanting our life, you know? And we were that passionate about what we do. And it takes that kind of passion to stick to it, to love it, to not look at the clock. The most boring job, I mentioned my technical writing job a little bit ago. I was not passionate about writing about hazardous waste for a government contractor. So the time would just click by so slowly, I could hardly stand it. If I ever needed to go to the bathroom, I would go to the one furthest from me because I just needed to kill time. I didn't have enough to do, and the pace was too slow. I was not passionate about that. But when I'm passionate about what I do now, which I am, I love what I do. I'm not watching the clock, and if I ever do, I'm like, oh my goodness, it's been 5 hours. It seems like 5 minutes. And so whatever you are passionate about, that's what you should pursue because your likelihood of success is going to be so much higher. All right, be excellent. I share this one because I think you are in the stage of life where you can develop this habit and you have practice just built into your student life, all right? You have a lot of group projects, I'm assuming, or some of them anyway. And I remember group projects, and you're in those groups and some people are given a lot and some people are not, and it can be frustrating. And at times you feel like, well, I don't want to give a lot because not everyone's given a lot and it's not even and it's not fair and it's all of that. But here's the thing, when you're in a work environment, it's a group project that you're doing. And the people who give the most and who bring excellence to the table hold all the cards. In our business, we have a bit of a pattern. A lot of women go into journalism. It just seems that way. And so we have a lot of interns who come from BYU. They tend to be female, not all of them. They tend to be female. And they come and do their internship. And when they're awesome, we want to hire them because we know what we're getting and they know what they're getting into too. So then we hire them. They get married about then. This is a compilation. It's just, this is basically the story. They get married about then, and a couple years later, they're going to be a mom. And they're faced with that same dilemma I was just describing, where they're trying to figure out, oh, I want to be a good mom, but I also love what I do. And they come in and we have this conversation that I've had with many over the years, where they say, I want to be a mom, but I want to work here. And what could we do? What are some options? Could I work part-time? Could I work from home? Could I do one project a month? Those who are excellent, those who I can't live without, I'll say yes to anything that they say. You want to work remotely? Your husband's moving to Texas? Okay, well, what can we do? What are you willing to do? Because if they've become someone I can't live without, I'll do what they want. If I have someone who says, I want to start a business, so I only want to work here part-time, or I need Fridays off because I meet with clients or this new thing or whatever, I'm willing to do that with people who are excellent. With people who are mediocre, basically they're coming in saying, is it okay if I make your life harder even though I'm mediocre? That's what I'm hearing. And the answer is no. So when you're excellent, your options are so much greater. And if you're entrepreneurs, if you're taking this lecture series, you're going to want some flexibility. You're going to want people who will listen to you and take your ideas into consideration when you're proposing a new arrangement, okay? This is a picture of a baby boom that we had in our office a few years ago. And every one of these women stayed on in some capacity or another because they were excellent. So let me just encourage you in your college years to develop that habit of just giving everything, just being that person who does the most and is the happiest and solves the problems, so that when you get in a work situation, that you will be that person. When there's layoffs, your supervisor will say, I can't live without this person, so they have to stay. Whatever we have to do, we have to keep them. So just a tip to be excellent. All right, another lesson that I've learned is to take life in seasons. I think when I was in college, I thought it was a race. I was in a hurry to do everything and write a bestseller and accomplish everything and visit all 7 continents this year and all of that. But I've learned life is actually a pretty long time. We have time to pursue a lot of different things, and they don't all have to happen at once. These are 2 women I've interviewed who talked about that in particular. Julie Azevedo-Hanks, the one on the left, is a singer-songwriter, and she's also a therapist. And that's why the headline says the second verse. That's her passion and her love now. She just had a book come out called The Burnout Cure, where she talks about the idea of, especially in our culture, of wanting to be perfect, and wanting to give off this persona of being perfect and having it all together, and how that is actually a very detrimental way to think over the long term. It's detrimental to our relationships, can be anyway. And so she talked about taking life in seasons and pursuing one thing at a time with gusto and what you're passionate about, and not feeling bad about the other. On the right is Jane Clayson Johnson, who was at the top of her game in broadcast. She was the early morning show anchor with Bryant Gumbel, to BYU grad, made it to the top of her game. Is doing really, really well. And she wasn't married yet, but she had the opportunity to get married in her mid to late 30s. And when she had that opportunity, it involved moving to Boston and being a wife and eventually mother, stepmother right off, and then a mother soon after that. And she quit her job, and she decided she had given everything to her season of broadcast, and she wanted to give everything to this new motherhood season. She's kind of found a way to combine both and do some part-time and independent type projects, which has been awesome. But I learned that from her, is that we can do that. That's okay to do that, to take your life in seasons. And I encourage you women to consider that and think about that and what season of life you're in and what season of life comes next. She told me a story of how she was in an airport and she ran into a famous person, I can't remember who it was, and she had interviewed them on national TV a few times, and so they were catching up. And the guy said to her, so, what you doing now? I guess you're just a mom. You know, he saw the kids with her. And she said, no, I am a mother. And I loved her confidence in that she was taking that motherhood season very seriously, and that was her new career. So I love that lesson I learned from her. Number 6 is don't take life too seriously. I thought I'd share this, because of the game on Saturday. It didn't go our way, and some people in my house were taking that pretty seriously, and neighbors and such, and my 9-year-old, who knows more BYU football trivia than any 9-year-old kid should know, was just fired up and hardly wanted to go to church because there were Ute fans in his primary class, and what was he gonna do about that? So anyway, I thought I would share a story about Holly Mendenhall. This is Bronco's wife, and I loved interviewing her because it is fun to interview people who don't get interviewed a lot. Sometimes the hardest people to interview are those who have been in the public a lot, and they kind of have the things they like to say, and they don't always let you in very deep because they're used to what they share with the public. And Holly has not been interviewed a lot by her own choice. She likes to be the mom and be at home and let Bronco do his thing. So I was excited to get to know her and to share her story with our readers. She let me come over and do an interview when they were moving. We sat on boxes, literally boxes, at her house and just chatted. And then the photo shoot was going to take place a couple weeks later because we wanted Bronco to be there, and his schedule was such that it needed to be Saturday night, a couple weeks after the interview. So I showed up at their house and Saturday night. Bronco still wasn't there, and we're kind of setting up lights and getting ready. And Holly said to their 3 boys, let's see, boys, what should you wear? Don't you all have a blue shirt that you could put on? And I just started smiling because have any of you had a mom when it's family picture day? That's not maybe her happiest, friendliest day of life. Like family picture day can be super stressful. And sometimes when a magazine shows up for a photo shoot, there's stress about what to wear, and clothes have been purchased, and there's stress involved. I loved that Holly, as we're setting up, was figuring out what they were going to wear. She wasn't taking this very seriously. And I honestly don't think she picked blue because of BYU. I think she just thought, I think y'all have blue shirts. That'd be easy. Let's just do that. She did not take life too seriously. In fact, she was one who is not a big fan of how intense the rivalry is. It's just football, not that big a deal. She wears red, She doesn't care. There's a lot more important things than football, and I think that's an important thing in life, is to not take it too seriously. What I found is that our business is a stressful business. We operate on deadlines and tight profit margins, and there is stress, and it is so much fun to be having stress with fun people, with happy people, who aren't sitting there about to cry, because that's me sometimes. I'm a red. I mentioned the color code, and I can take life too seriously, and I love being around people who just remind me, this just doesn't matter, This is just a magazine. It's just today. It's just no big deal. So I love that lesson that I learned from her. Lesson number 7 is to go with your gut. Whatever that might be. And I wanted to share this story. I don't know how many of you watch The Bachelor or Bachelorette. I don't happen to be one of them, but I did start watching the series last year because Jeff, with one F, Jeff Holm, was picked as the Bachelorette picked him. Okay, so he won the season a year ago. Did any of you watch that and want to admit that? Do you know who this guy is? Okay. The rest of you know, you just won't say anything. But anyway, we're not a tabloid magazine. So when people started telling me, you should really put Jeff on the cover because he's going to win, we think he's going to win, you should really start watching it. He's a local business owner here in Utah County. I was thinking, oh, I can't even watch that show. I have kids, we don't watch this show. And this is just too tabloid. But I started watching it because I was hearing this over and over again that I should write this article. And he was charming and he was fun and I loved the Utah County angle. And so I did do the story. We did the interview and we did the story. And by this time he had been picked and it was well known and all of that. But even as I'm doing the story, I'm feeling in my gut, don't go on and on about how much he loves Emily, I think was her name. And don't go on and on about how they're going to get married and all this. Focus on his business. That's the Utah County angle. And so that's what I did. He owns People Water, or he's one of the owners anyway. And businessman, interesting entrepreneur guy, went to UVU, didn't graduate, he's just a business mind and a thinker and a doer. So I focused on that. As soon as this hits the newsstand, guess who breaks up? Jeff and Emily. And I was so glad that I had followed my gut to not just make it this sappy love story, because that's embarrassing. Our magazine's out for 2 months. So I was glad that I followed my gut on that. And whatever you want to call the gut, the spirit, whatever it is to you, then you will find a lot of business answers that way. And it might seem simple, and it might seem conservative or whatever, but a lot of business decisions are made that way. Sure, we look at charts, and we look at numbers, and we look at revenue, and we look at history, and we look at projections, but a lot of decisions are made that way. And as I've interviewed a lot of successful business people, I'm actually surprised how many of them just talk about this. They designed their business on a napkin, and then they followed their gut. I know that you're here to learn ways not to do that, what I just described. But the reality is a lot of people just know something will work, and then they have the passion and all these other things we talked about, the persistence, to make it happen. So to go with your gut. Number 8, don't be limited by circumstances. I was guilty of when I grew up feeling like, I felt like I was from a poorer family. I mentioned my dad was a school teacher. And I felt like other kids just had a leg up on me, that they could do more and that they were more confident. I had some of these self-defeating thoughts going through my head. And I would think, well, I can't really be that successful because I'm just Jeanette, and I just have these setbacks, and I'm kind of shy, and I'm short, and all these other things. Well, what I found is that so many people I interviewed, and my favorite people I interview, are those who had some circumstances they had to overcome. They're not the ones that had everything go their way their whole entire lives, never had a care in the world, and succeeded at everything they tried. The most interesting stories, and really the people who go the furthest, are ones who did have some reasons that they might not have been successful, and they overcame them. This is Noelle Picus Pace. She's an athlete, but also a business owner. She is a skeleton competitor, but a few years ago, before the Olympics, a few months before the Olympics, 114 days to be exact, in a freak accident, she was practicing her skeleton, a runaway bobsled. Don't know how a bobsled gets out of control, but somehow a bobsled came down and ran over her leg. And she was 114 days away from competing in the Olympics. Well, she had every reason to say, not this year. I'll get lots of sympathy, I'll get lots of this, I'll probably get so the benefit of the doubt in future competitions, but not this year. But no, she thought, I have trained my whole life, I've had my eye on this Olympics, I am getting there. So she used all the local physical therapists, gave it everything she had. There's a documentary called 114 Days about her journey back. Now, she didn't win the gold medal at the Olympics, but she had recovered in time for the Olympics and also competed in the 2010 games. So it was the 2006 games when that happened, and then 2010. And she still competes, and along the way, while she was recovering and in between seasons, she started Snowfire Hats, which is a business of the cute hat that she's wearing. She didn't say to herself, I'm just going to sit here and let Sports Illustrated write about how sad this is, that I could have been, should have been, and had this tragedy happen. So if you have some of those self-defeating behaviors, you need to figure out how to get over them. If you feel like, oh, I don't have the money that so-and-so has to start his venture, I don't have this, or I'm not married, or I am married, or whatever it is you're saying to yourself that is a reason that you can't succeed, that is just not worth your time and it's not worth your thoughts. You got to get over that because you don't have to be limited by your circumstances in any way. Number 9, which is the last thought that I want to share with you, is that Plan B can be beautiful. I'll tell you the 2 stories here. On the left is Stephanie Nielsen. She's a popular blogger, goes by Nini's Dialogues. And she was a popular blogger before she had a tragic airplane accident. She and her husband were in a crash. They live in Provo now. This crash happened in Arizona. The pilot was killed, and Stephanie was burned over 80% of her body. And her husband was burned a lot as well. She was in a coma for a long time, about 3 months, and when she came to, she had to get to know herself all over again, see her kids, let her kids see her for the first time, and it was devastating. She had been a blogger of beautiful things. She was a beautiful woman, into fashion, into home decor, and now she looked quite different, and it was very difficult for her. It was a year before she posted a picture of her new self on her blog, even though people love her and loved her even more after she did that. She told me when I interviewed her that Oprah called and wanted her to be on the show. This was before she posted the first picture. And she thought to herself, I think I'm going to do it because that way I'll get it over with all at once. Everyone will see me at once, and if they still want to be my friend, then I'll know, and then we can be friends. And if they don't, I won't have had to have seen their reaction to me the first time that they see me. And so she went on Oprah, and of course everyone loved her, and she continues to blog and be well loved and be a good example of our valley and of religion and of family life. And her Plan B is beautiful, and in fact it has propelled her to success, that she had this setback. At the time it looked like a setback, and it's propelled her forward, and I love that. This next story I want to share on the right is of Neon Trees. This is a band, you guys know that, right? A band that, local band, and I wanted to interview them. Of course I wanted to interview them, and so we're looking for times to do this, and it's rainy, and this is a January issue and all that, and they say, hey, we have this great idea. We're going to be spending a day in LA, and why don't you come down, fly down, we'll do this sunny photo shoot, it'll be fun, you can watch us present at AMA and all of this. So I go do that, rainiest day in LA's history. Okay, total downpour. We're sitting in their trailer all day long, waiting for the sun to come out, and it never did. Finally, we thought, we'll just do it with the umbrella, and we'll Photoshop it out later. Well, when we took the photos, in the end, we thought, that umbrella's kind of cool. And so we left it in there, we didn't Photoshop it out, and it's become one of our favorite covers, partially because of the story. This photo was also taken in about 4 minutes, and we usually like to have a couple hours to take a photo, but they had to go out on the red carpet, and we had a limited amount of time. We were in a small doorway, and so we took that. That was not our Plan A, not Plan B, not Plan C. But now I look back, and I think I'm glad that turned out that way. So those were 9 things that I've learned from interviewing successful business people. I've loved my journey from journalism to business owner, and loved what I've learned here at this school. I wish you all the best on your journey.